Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We're discussing Rush, and we've made it to Power Windows, their 11th studio album released in 1985, right smack dab in the middle of the 80s. And this is a significant moment, I think. For me, Power Windows really represents the apex of their synthesizer-based writing. Everything that they had been working towards in the 80s with moving pictures, signals, Grace Under Pressure, it was all building up towards this album. This is the realization of all the work they put into those synth-based songs. And it is, sort of their ultimate statement as a synthesizer rock band. And in that sense, it's actually, for me, comparable to Hemispheres, which, of course, is their ultimate statement as a progressive rock band. It's all the best things about their extended song structures and conceptual lyrics all wrapped up into one perfect album, one perfect statement. And Power Windows is exactly the same thing, but it's in the 80s synthesizer context. The only real difference is that with Hemispheres, they had the foresight to change their style. Once you make that perfect statement and you achieve everything you set out to achieve, if you don't change, it's just going to get repetitive and dull. And they didn't have the foresight to change when they did Power Windows, because we did get one more album after this of the synthesizer kind of style with Hold Your Fire, which is one synthesizer album too many, if you ask me personally. But we'll talk more about that in the next video. But Power Windows, I think, is really, really great. I don't like it quite as much as Grace Under Pressure, but I think, there's an argument to be made that this might be a deeper album. This album takes a little bit more time to digest than something like Grace Under Pressure. I think I like Grace Under Pressure because it's got a great immediacy. It is very obvious that it's a, hard-rocking, guitar-driven album with synthesizers supporting the guitar. And that's a significant difference, because on Power Windows, it's kind of back to the Signals thing, where the guitar and the synthesizers kind of play an equal role. But I think they achieve a better balance on Power Windows than they do on Signals. And I mean, there is an awful lot of synthesizers on this album. Power Windows is perhaps Rush's densest album musically, and there's definitely an argument to be made. I think Power Windows is also their most musically complex album. Which is probably controversial amongst the die-hard prog fans, but when you listen to it and you hear just the sheer amount of sounds that are coming out in the stereo space, it's the ultimate album where you go, holy shit, this is just a three-piece. It's quite hard to believe. There's just so much going on in the music, and that's great. That's exactly what they were going for with the synth style, right? They wanted to create a layered, textured sort of a sound, and it is best represented on this album, I think. If there is one flaw with it, is that being in 1985, a lot of the synthesizer sounds that they choose are very dated. So this album is probably, in terms of production value, the most set in the 80s. It is certainly an album of its time, as was Grace Under Pressure. But I think Grace Under Pressure is perhaps aged a little bit better. But there's nothing wrong with Power Windows as far as I'm concerned. Like I said, it's just a matter of dating, right? Those are sounds that are very much deeply connected with the 80s, but that's forgivable. The drumming is also very, very notable on the album. Of course, Neil Peart is using the Simmons drums, so he's using the electronic drums to trigger all kinds of interesting and unique sounds, and he really expands upon the style that he was starting out with Grace Under Pressure, and that he's creating a very, very textured, layered drum patterns. And with the Simmons pads, he has access to a huge array of sounds, and he uses all of those sounds to create these very, very layered and complex drum patterns, and that hugely contributes to the vibe of the album, which is really, really cool. Like I said, I think with as far as the guitar is concerned, he is kind of competing with the synthesizers a little bit on this album. It is more of a guitar synthesizer equal rather than the synthesizer supporting the guitar. But Lyson does churn out some really, really great performances on this album as well, and it's all about his tone. I've mentioned that before. It's not that heavy, crunchy, traditional hard rock guitar tone that we're used to. In the 80s, it's very much more a clean sound, but it really works on this album because you know, the tone of his guitar cuts through the synthesizers almost like razor blades. So you know, it's not like you have to wonder where Lifeson is. It's very obvious in the mix that he's doing what he's doing. So that's good. You know, it is musically a well balanced album in that regard. And it's got some great songs and a weird album cover. It's the album cover with a lad with no shirt on looking out the window. Um, Not sure if there's any cool concept behind it or what, but I'm sure if there's anyone out there that knows, please do let me know. Send me something in the comments. Anyway, let's try and dissect the tracks of this Power Windows album. So the album opens with the Big Money. This is a famous Rush song, and it is a great song. You know, it's almost like an epic, and a lot of the songs on here are kind of like epics. You know, there's a lot of different sections in these songs. But the Big Money has got lots of great sections. You know, that opening is just so powerful. We hear that textured drum style that Pierre's doing. You know, he's holding the beat with his bass drum, but there's all kinds of little cowbells and odd Simmons pad sounds that are popping up through there, and it's really really good. And once the song kicks in and the bass line it really kicks off. And once that groove gets going, you hear right away like the density of the music. There's all kinds of synth sounds that are popping up in and out, and the sequencers that pop in. There's just so much going on. But the song really rocks. Like I said, I love all the different sections, and I love the transitions to the sections. Boom, doom, down, doom, doom, down, big money goes around the world. Really, really cool. Lyrically, obviously, it's about global finance and all the intrigue that goes along with that. So it's cool, cool song title. Definitely fitting for the '80s and the yuppie generation on Wall Street and that. So that's really cool. It's got a cool middle section, and what more can be said? It is a classic Rush song. And it feels like I said, it feels more like an epic because it's got this big intro that takes its time, and there's a good middle section, like I said, and then the outro is really great too. We get those crazy drum fills by Pierre at the end. I like how he lands on the bass drum there on that beat, which is really really cool. Yeah, great song, Big Money. And then we get track 2, Grand Designs. Now this has to be the pinnacle of the sequencer usage. There's so much going on. It opens up right away with the sequencer, which is very very upbeat, very uplifting, and the groove is syncopated quite a bit by Neil and Geddy, and I love when the first little vocal stanza comes up. And it finally goes into the main groove. Kind of hear that reggae influence a little bit, but it's a little bit more masked. It's got more of a Rush sort of a staple to it, which is cool. And like I said, the sequencers pop up in the song quite a bit, particularly towards the bridge or in the middle and the end of the song. Just the sheer amount of sequencers and the complexity of the the complexity of the sequencer pattern as well is really crazy. And I mean that adds a whole new element of challenge as far as playing the stuff goes, because Neil Peart's obviously got to keep time, but then when the sequencer comes in, he's got to lock in time with the sequencer. So in terms of difficulty to play, again, this stuff is probably amongst the most difficult Rush material to play, and I think Rush has even said that at some point during it. They acknowledge that it's not particularly easy to pull off any of the songs on this album. So in that sense, it's still very much a progressive rock type thing. But yeah, Grand Designs is a good track. It's not amongst the best Rush tracks ever, but it's good. They brought it back recently, which is quite cool. Another one of those more obscure tracks that they've been bringing out live, which is cool. Anyway. Track 3, Manhattan Project. This is a great song. This one almost creeps up on you. It's got a very slow, brooding opening. There's that ominous synth patch at the very start, and then those fills. Really low bass note there, which is really cool. And the song kind of starts out, and the warm synths are all right in your face, and it almost, when it starts out, it almost feels a bit like an AOR thing, and more of that will come on the next album. you know, it's a very friendly and inviting sort of melodic thing. But once the song gets going, you know, it is a high energy classic rocking Rush number. Um, you know, once that arpeggiated guitar line comes in, ding 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 ding, and then the that's a classic part, and then of course the way the music builds underneath that line is really great. I really like the chorus, you know, Big Bang, shook the world, and all that. That's you know, it's a dark lyric. Of course, the lyric is in reference to the development of the atomic bomb. Obviously, Manhattan Project lends that topic very easily. Um, but yeah, really great chorus. Like I said, even with the dark subject matter and, you know, the bombing of Japan. But it's a great high energy number, and particularly like that middle section too, when the orchestral patches start coming in. Yeah, that's just grand. And I mean, the energy level, it's one of those Rush songs where the energy level just kind of keeps building and building and building and building, and all winds its way back to that ominous drum march, which is really cool. And yeah, one of the highlight tracks of the album for me. Manhattan Project is really good. There's a great live version of it too on Show of Hands. Moving on, track 4, Marathon. Certainly one of the best on the album for me. This is a really good song, and you know, it's a prog song. You know, it contains all the elements. You know, it's got there's several different sections to it. There's all kinds of tremendous playing and lots of cool chops on offer, and yeah, I mean, it's just a great song. I love the intro is very grand and stately. Boom doom doom doom. When that synthesizer comes in, it's just so epic and grand. And I like the verses too. I like how Geddy switches the riff up. He plays a couple of variations on the riff. You know, first it's doo 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 doo, and second verse comes in. He's doo 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 or doo 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 doo. Slightly different, which is quite cool, and it keeps things interesting. And you know, it's cool to follow that stuff as the song goes along rather. But the big story to write home about with Marathon is the middle section in the middle. I absolutely love that. That's a moment of awesome in the Rush catalog. And they introduced that as a bridge, and cool, really great Lifeson guitar solo, and they just build on that riff, and then they put some melodic stuff on top of that, and it's just absolutely classic. Again, lots of synthesizers on there, but I mean, it doesn't matter. It's a classic Rush song. Lyrically, it's really cool. It's kind of talking about you know, the journey of life and comparing it as an endurance marathon, which is quite cool. Definitely some really good lyrics from Peart on that track, which is great. Flipping the record over to side 2, we get Territories as track 5. Track 1 is side 2, obviously. And this is another really great song. Again, very proggy. You know, this is probably the proggiest of the 80s albums. There's all kinds of different sections and moods and tones that come through on a lot of these tracks. And Territories, I think, is the most obvious of that. You know, there's lots of different sections, and you know, the chords are fairly, you know, similar the whole way through. But it's all in terms of the tone of the synth and whatnot, and there's all kinds of little different variations as it goes along. And yeah, it's really good. The main riff might be a bit, you know, kind of generic 80s. You know, you can hear that main riff is a little dated. But that's fine. Of course it's going to be of its time. It was written in 1985. But yeah, it builds up very nicely, and yeah, it's a great song. Lyrically, it's about geopolitics and you know, exploring the differences between cultures and ethnic things and stuff like that. It's a great track. Definitely a top cut on the album for me. It's up there with Marathon and Big Money. And then we get to track 6, Middletown Dreams. Now this is where it starts to get, you know, the synth patches and the sounds start to get a little bit tired to my ears a little bit at this point. You know, like I said, this is probably a deeper album. You know, it gets better with multiple listenings. It's not as immediate as Grace Under Pressure. But like I said, one of the drawbacks is the production, and you're just kind of getting tired of the production by the time you get to Middletown Dreams. Um, and as such, it just kind of feels like an album track. Lyrically, it seems kind of like a continuation of what Neil was exploring with Subdivisions, which is cool. Um, but yeah, it's kind of a forgettable track, and probably the weakest on the album, if you ask me. That AOR sound, that adult-oriented rock, is starting to creep into the mix a little bit, but it's subtle. Not as obvious as the next album. Moving on to track 7, Emotion Detector. This is another part of the album that kind of falls short a little bit for me. It's definitely better than Middletown Dreams. You know, the chorus is what wins it for me. It is a very poppy chorus and you know, song-oriented kind of a thing. But the melody is really strong, and it's a great hook. You know, straight to the heart of the matter, straight to the beautiful part. And the big thick synth chords are very nice. That pop up underneath that. But again, the sequencers on both tracks, Middletown Dreams and Emotion Detector, you know, again, your ears start to get a little exhausted at that point. So those two kind of make up the weaker end of the album. I think Emotion Detector is probably a little bit higher, but you know, if those two tracks were a little bit different, then maybe this would be my favorite album over Grace Under Pressure as far as the 80s albums are concerned. But anyway, moving on to the final track on the album, track 8 is Mystic Rhythms, and this winds everything up much nicer than the other two tracks. Mystic Rhythms is a fantastic album, a fantastic song. Very unique in the Rush catalog. You know, it definitely doesn't rock. You know, it is probably the most blatant example of that textural thing that they're going for. You know, it's not about the big riffs or the chops or the fills or anything. It's all about creating an atmosphere by layering all kinds of different musical textures together. And you know, I think Mystic Rhythms. You know, there's an argument to be made with Mystic Rhythms that is the, you know, if you could narrow it down to one song, that song is the apex of their 80s writing. I think that's everything that they were setting out to achieve with the synthesizers and whatnot is realized perfectly on Mystic Rhythms. But yeah, like I said, really good song. I mean, I love the drum pattern that starts it out, and that funky bass line that opens it up too. That's really cool. But it's almost ominous. You know, there's an ominous vibe, but there's also like a kind of sacred vibe. You know, those lush guitar chords. That's, you know, there's a mystical sort of a quality to it. And even though there's all these synthesizer lines and synth tones going around, you know, it does feel, you know, there's a natural beauty to it. It's difficult to describe. And the lyrics are great. The lyrics fit it very well. You know, lines like, you know, under a canopy of stars, and you know, it's about the rhythms of the world, and the rhythms that keep you know, the world spinning on its axis, which is a great concept, and yeah, it's just a beautiful song. I love towards the middle. Again, it's got an unusual song structure. It's certainly not a verse chorus thing. You know, it goes through, you know, a few distinct stages, and it all wraps itself up really nicely. But towards the middle, and that arpeggiated bit, that's really nice. Really nice little bit of Lyson, and the middle section is really great too. I love the bass line that kicks in, boom doom 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 doom, and Lyson almost does like a backwards sounding guitar solo over that, which is another really highlight moment. And like I said, it all winds up, and there's the big emotional climax, and it goes back to those mystical chords by Lyson, and it fades out after that. But it's a beautiful track. You know, definitely one of the highlights of the album, I would say. Mystic Rhythms is really cool. And that wraps up Power Windows. Like I said several times now, this is certainly, you know, if you're interested in the 80s output of Rush, you know, this is certainly their ultimate statement, but you know, don't expect to get it on the first listen. You know, it definitely warrants repeated listenings, and you know, it's an album with a little more depth than the average Rush album, at least on a musical level, because it's so layered and it's so textural, and there's just so much going on in the mix. And as long as you can kind of get past that 80s sound and that, you know, the sound of those synthesizers, and just listen to the music of it, you know, it is a brilliant album. It really is brilliant. So check it out if you haven't already. And if you have checked it out and didn't like it, then reevaluate it. Listen to it a couple more times and see if anything interesting catches your ear. But yes, on that note, I will thank you all for tuning in and listening to my near incoherent ramblings. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment and all that fun stuff. And stay tuned for more Rush videos, because I'm pressing even deeper on into their catalog with Hold Your Fire next. So you will see me then in the future. Take care.